there, this is Kimberly Wilson, and welcome to the 487th edition of Tranquility du Jour, bringing you tranquility since 2005. Tranquility du Jour is a series of nourishing conversations about living a full and meaningful life with doses of tranquility. And I'm delighted to introduce this week's guest, Jen Louden. We're chatting about her new book, Why Bother? Discover the Desire for What's Next. Learn about her circuitous journey to writing this beautiful book, the 2 kinds of why bother she's identified, and her 6 stages to bothering. Prepare to be inspired. For those of you looking ahead and eager for an escape in 2021, I'll be hosting a Paris retreat and a Provence retreat in June. And there are 2 spots left for Paris and a few spots left for Provence. Details in the show notes, kimberlywilson.com/487. And for those of you new to Tranquility du Jour, there's a link in the show notes to find out more. Head on over to kimberlywilson.com/new, and a big welcome. A big thank you to Inel, who wrote over on iTunes, "So great to listen to this. I've been listening to her podcast and also read her books and own her planner. Kimberly is such a talented person. Every time I listen to her, it uplifts my spirits and gives me the motivation I need." Thank you so much, Inel, for taking the time to write a review on iTunes, and I'm delighted to have you as a listener of the show. Jen Louden is a personal growth pioneer who helped launch the concept of self-care with her first bestseller, The Woman's Comfort Book. Since then, she's written 6 additional books on well-being and whole living, including the Women's Retreat Comfort Book and The Life Organizer, with close to 1 million copies of her books in print in 9 languages. She's spoken around the US, Canada, and Europe, and has written a national magazine column for a Martha Stewart magazine. Plus, she's been profiled or quoted in dozens of major magazines, 2 of Brené Brown's books, and has appeared on hundreds of TV programs, radio shows, and podcasts, even on Oprah. Jennifer has been teaching women's retreats since 1992 and creating vibrant online communities and innovative learning experiences since 1999. She writes weekly to her email list of 20,000 and hosts an online paid community of over 600 members. She lives in Boulder County, Colorado. Welcome, Jen.
Oh, Kimberly, so good to hear your voice.
Yours too. And what a treat to have you on the show again. And congrats on your new book, Why Bother? Discover the Desire for What's Next.
Oh, thank you. I'm really proud of it. It's the book I wanted to write my whole life. So I think it's my 8th book and I finally got it.
That's amazing because, I think I found your book in the UK back in 1995, and it was the Woman's Comfort Book. And I was backpacking through Europe.
Aww.
And I stumbled upon that book and I actually bought it. And, when you're backpacking and you have everything in your bag.
It's a big deal. It's a big deal to buy a book.
It is a big deal to buy a book. So this is amazing. This is your 8th. And that's 25 years ago. 25 years you've been writing.
1992, the Woman's Comfort Book came out. So do not count that up because it makes me look old.
Wow. Isn't that amazing though? You've been writing for 28 years. You've been publishing for 28 years.
Yeah, I've been writing since high school, but let's not count some of that.
Right. Well, tell us a little bit, because I know a little about your journey, having been on your writing retreats. But, this was not the book you kind of were starting with, and it seems like it transformed into it. So can you talk us through your journey and the challenges, which I know were there, right, to writing this book?
Yes. Well, I'm going to answer that in 2 ways if I can. So,
of course,
some of this is in the book for sure. I really struggled with being a self-help author. I really struggled with my body of work. I felt a lot of shame is too strong of a word, but you're a yoga person. So we all know the Gita and we all know that we need to accept our dharma versus the dharma that we want to have. And I really struggled with that. And people may find that off-putting because I had a lot of success. And I think it's a something that a lot of us go through, though, where we have success, we want something, we're working hard at something, but we have ambivalence about it because we have a sense of fantasy about our identity or who we wish we would be. So I say that as background because when I finished the last book that I wrote, which was 11 years ago, called The Life Organizer, I swore I would never write another self-help book. So I set out to write fiction. Actually, before that book, I set out to write fiction. So it's probably been 15 years. And The Life Organizer kind of popped in there and said, okay, one more self-help book. I wrote a couple of novels that had a lot of promise, but I never went back and rewrote them. And every writer knows that writing is rewriting. I did try to write other self-help books. I'd send proposal ideas or titles at least to my agent, and she'd be like, yeah, that's a great idea. And then I would not want to write it because I hadn't made peace with who I was essentially and what I'm here to do, I believe now. And finally I gave a talk, and this was about 6 or 7 years ago, Kimberly, and it was at Seattle. It was in Seattle. I used to live near Seattle, and it was at a women's conference. And I told the story of this Job-like affliction period I had gone through that included divorce and my dad's death and my friend's suicide and creative faceplants. And I used the poem, Barns Burned Down, Now I Can See the Moon, to structure
that
talk. Yeah, right?
Yes.
And I loved this talk. And I got off the stage and I'm like, oh my God, that was the best talk of my life. And then I ran into another speaker's husband, and he said, those were incredible stories. And I'm like, that's it. That's my next book. I'm going to write a book about this Job-like affliction time in my life. So I spent 4 years and 500 pages writing a memoir. And in the end, it totally didn't work as a work of literature. But the amazing thing was that in those 4 years, I figured out so many things about myself that I didn't know. I really figured out what turned into this book. And I really figured out what my Dharma was. And that made it really easy to walk away from that book. I tried to write another book from that book that mercifully died within a few months. And then this one came together really quickly. And I really think the best work of my life by far. So yeah, there was a lot of other detours and a lot of fighting who I am and what I want to do.
Because I remember you working on the memoir, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I remember, getting an email of sorts, and it was just like, oh my gosh, like this is not going to work. I'm going to redo it. And then the next thing I know, you've got this new, beautiful, big book that, it's like it just flowed out of you after having gone through this long process.
I think it flowed out of me because I don't know. I mean, hindsight, we make such neat, tidy stories out of hindsight.
Right.
Why did it come out of me this fast as it did? I think these are themes I have been trying to understand for 20 years. How do we come back from apathy? How do we come back from loss? How do we come back from things being taken from us? How do we come back from success that we're not interested in anymore? How do we come to these moments in life when it's like we're at a cliff and we have to jump? And what I learned, Kimberly, when I wrote that memoir that failed, was that every time I came to this cliff, I jumped and then I scrambled back up the cliff, right? Mm-hmm. I didn't ever let myself go fully through the process. And I discovered that there's really like a process inside of the process. And that's what I wrote about. And it's really letting go and discovering desire itself. And that replenishes us in a way to figure out what's next in a more genuine way.
I love that. I think that's such a good reminder for people who, struggle, like they're really trying to push something out, trying to create something, bring something into the world, and yet it's just not working, right? And so to be able to find the process within that process, like what is actually trying to be birthed there. And I love that haiku, the barns burnt down, now I can see the moon. That is so powerful.
It's so powerful. And I could never make that book work around it. I tried wrapping myself around that haiku so many times and it just didn't work. And it's hard. It's hard to face the things that don't work. It's hard to trust that something else is going to come out of them. One of the ideas in the book that was really powerful for me to language, really for the first time, is signature themes. And, we see this in filmmakers. I went to film school. That's where I got my college degree in, was film production and criticism. And, you study auteurs. The auteur theory was very big when I was in school. And here, Hitchcock had these themes, Truffaut had these themes, Picasso had these themes. Well, we all have them. We all have them. And I think part of understanding our Dharma is really seeing what are those themes that won't leave me alone.
What would you say your themes are?
Helping people make more of what they want. Helping people make, whether it's more connection or more love or more creativity or more. Don't settle, man. It's bugged the heck out of me since I was little. When people are just like, that's enough. That's good enough for me. Oh, why bother? Since I was little, it has just pissed me off to no end. And then I think the other signature theme for me is creating, making stuff myself. That's something I can't help but do. I have to do it, or I don't want to be alive.
Right. Yeah, I could definitely see both of those for you. And I think you bring those forth, you manifest those well.
But I had to commit to them. And that's really a big part of what I discovered and tried to write about in the book, is you have to commit to your themes, not because they work out the way you want them to, not because they get you love or fame or fortune, but because they're yours.
One of the things you talk about, right, is there's two kinds of why bother. And I do hear, as a therapist, I hear what's the point a lot. And I think that they're probably synonymous phrases.
Definitely.
So what are the two kinds of why bother? And how did you discover them through your journey?
I don't think I discovered them really until I had written the book. It was one of those, isn't that obvious? And the first kind is the one that we're most familiar with. It's the one that we complain to our partner, we bring into therapy, we tell our coach, and we think we know the answer to it. So we say, what's the point? Or I'm too old, or it's too late, or it's all been written. And we're not actually asking a question. We know the answer. And the answer is there is no point. I am too old. It is too late. So the one kind of why bother is we aren't even willing to ask the question, what do I want to bother about? What is calling to me? What is truly, genuinely mine to go towards next? Where is my desire? We turn away from actually asking. So what I'm asking people to do in this book is to come into that moment and start to bring wonder and self-kindness and self-compassion and a little bit of grit and start to ask. And the other kind of why bother is, wow, what is genuinely interesting to me, even if it's just like a tiny iota that I don't understand it, or what it means, or what it'll get me, or what sense it makes. And one of my favorite stories about that is in Elizabeth Gilbert's book, Big Magic. And she writes about, I'm sure everyone knows the story, she writes about getting interested in seeds. And she's like, I don't know why I want to get seeds or order seed catalogs. I've never gardened before. And 2 years later, by following that desire little by little, she has entire card catalogs filled with all this research about seeds and moss and plants. And she starts to write her amazing novel, The Signature of All Things. But if she had thought, why seeds? Who cares about seeds? Seeds. Why would I order seed catalogs? It never would have started. So that's the other kind of why bother.
Yeah,
that's the good kind.
Yeah. And I do love that story about Elizabeth Gilbert with regard to the seeds and where that took her.
It's a beautiful example of following the desire. And I'm not saying then the payoff is, she wrote an incredible novel. Well, if I follow my desire, I'll get my X. That's exactly the opposite of what I'm saying in the book. We have to find that process of trusting ourselves again. I mean, you are such a beautiful model of that, right? You're such a beautiful model of playing with your desires and your creativity and beauty, not because it's your brand, but because that's who you are.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I do think it is. It's, we're so multifaceted, right? And to be able to kind of bring that into who we are and our work and how we show up in the world is really powerful.
It is wholeness. It is life. It is joy. I mean, why wouldn't we? Well, because it's scary, because we might be exposed, because we might be made fun of, because it might not go the way it's supposed to, which right immediately makes me laugh. Like, how is it supposed to go? Why does it have to go anyway or anywhere?
Right, right. Yeah. As if there's one way, as if there's a roadmap of sort.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or a place to get.
And so tell us about savor versus serve.
Yeah, this was a project of mine in my many moments of trying to figure out who I was in the last 28 years. And I had a successful business around my early books. It was called Comfort Queen. And I hated being called the Comfort Queen. And as much as people loved it, I was gnashing my teeth. And so I closed all that down and I started something called Savor and Serve. And it was the idea of bringing together savoring life, comfort, self-care, self-nurturing, all the things that I was known for in my early work with service, with really this desire that I think we all have, and we certainly see it right now, where we want to make the world a better place. But if we focus on just making the world a better place, taking care of everyone else, putting everyone else first, which I'm sure many listeners can say, oh yeah, I know that place, we burn out, right? We lose our ability to bother, to care. So I wanted to try to bring the two together. Now, as a business or my next work, I never really figured out how to do it. But I was left with the truth of how important that idea is. And I think a lot of times we become cynical about having a voice in the world, whether for me it's about climate change, because we feel so small and insignificant, or because we're so worried we're going to be just drained dry if we care, if we take action, if we get involved.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And as you said, or it's just not enough, right? It's just
It's not enough,
it's just
right?
little me, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Instead of realizing that all change in history has been made up of so many people and so many choices, but we have a rather monolithic way, at least in the West, of pointing to one person. Martin Luther King Jr., JFK. Lately, it's been Greta Thunberg, right? That one person, and it's not that they aren't or weren't amazing people, but that they are part of a huge web of people taking action. Change has always been slow, incremental, and visible, and we never know what role we played in it, or rarely, very rarely. And to give up because we don't know, because we don't get that instant feedback, it's pretty childish, actually. And I'm holding my own hand up because it's exactly what I discovered I was doing when I was writing the book about climate change. I'd really given up learning and having a voice and figuring out what I could do more than giving a little money here and there, because I thought, well, I'm not, fill in the blank, whoever's name you want. Now it's Jane Fonda.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I do love the kind of reminder too about making sure that, we're savoring and, we are serving with the work that we're doing and kind of putting out there. Mm-hmm. It's, it just makes everything, I think, a bit more purposeful.
And sustainable and humble. I think one of the reasons we turn down service or turn away is because we're not willing to be our little human selves. We're not willing to be humbled by it. And we're not willing to say, that's enough. That's how much I'm willing to do and no more. We're not willing to respect our limits.
Well, and one of the chapters too, before we kind of move into the stages of bothering, is take stock. And I thought this one was really interesting and really powerful. And so can you walk us through, or just like for our listeners, a little bit about what does taking stock look like and how can we get started with that?
Well, I would harken back to this idea of starting to notice where you are insisting you cannot care, you cannot find a point, you cannot bother. Where could you just start? And you might do it in conversation with someone else. You might do it in your journal. You might listen to your speech with other people. How can you start to take stock of where is it that you're giving up on present day self having more by insisting it's not possible? Where are you giving up on present day self by insisting because you can't have what you had in the past, you can't have anything that's wonderful, satisfying in its own way now? So that's the first place that I think is important to take stock. There's also a quiz in the book that I really like to kind of put through some questions. And they're things like, do you look forward to going to bed more than getting up in the morning? Do you look forward to Netflix and popcorn at night more? Starting to look at the places that you're seeking numbing or comforting or habit in a way that's dulling you and numbing you. And no shame, no blame. We all do it, especially right now. But where can we start to just notice it a little bit more?
And it makes me think of, there was a workshop I did with David White, the poet. And, he asked us, he said, what's one thing you could do today that your future self would thank you for? And that just makes me tingle every time. And I think that really ties into what you're saying with regard to your Take Stock chapter.
I love that. I have a twist on it, which is, what could I do right now for my present self? Because I think when we're in the why bother, we have given up on the self that's here now, let alone our future self.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah, it's hard to kind of look, I think particularly now too, there's just hope is something that's missing for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And to focus more on the here and now is probably a good place to be.
It is. I'm looking at this incredible sky. We have clouds, we might get rain. It's so extraordinary if I can stop and actually, on the light, on the trees, on the buds coming out. I wish I could show you all.
Take a photo and I'll add it to the show notes.
Okay, I will. It probably won't look like anything. My windows are pretty dirty.
You can never quite capture,
No, I'm a terrible iPhone photographer.
No, you've got 6 stages of bothering: leave behind, ease in, settle, desire, become by doing, and be seen. Can you walk us through each of these?
Sure. And I really want to say that the reason why I gave us these stages is because when we're in a why bother time, we can often feel very afraid that nothing is ever going to change. And that's totally normal. This is not about forcing yourself into anything. A big premise in the book, everybody, is that life is always there waiting to rush in and say, I love you, be alive, be here. Come on, wake up. We are not doing this alone. It's a natural process. And what we're trying to do is give it some distinctions with these stages so you can kind of see where you might be and what might help life get to you, awaken you. But this is not about an effortful big project that you have to do alone. It's not about figuring anything out. It's about coming back to life. That's your work. And I say that over and over again in the book. And the first step, leave behind, is beginning to look at what are you holding on to as a shield, if you will, or as ballast around your feet, dragging you down. And if you can't have that, or if you can't figure that out, or if you can't have that person back, like this was me after my divorce, then you will not. And that's what we got to begin to get a little elbow room around. We're not going to leave it behind 100% or perfectly or quickly or anything like that. But we can begin to say, what am I holding on to? I'm too old. I'm too ill. There's a chapter about that. And I either bring in my own stories or other people's stories. Then ease in. It's interesting. I originally, when I conceived the steps, I thought the next step was settle, as in settle down, as in find the inner grace of stillness, or the inner, that grounding, right? It's always there, just like life. It's waiting for us. It's waiting for us to settle our nervous systems down, stop distracting, pinging, picking up the phone, texting, the news alerts coming, stop it all. And maybe right now you'd have to go to lock yourself in the bathroom from the rest of the family to get some quiet. But what I realized is ease in has to be before that, because when we're deep in why bother, there's a lot of lethargy. There can be depression. And if we settle too fast, we can just get more into why bother. So I gave you some things to do and ease in that gets you a little tapas going, a little heat, a little energy, a little return of that life, so you can feel it. And you go, oh yeah, maybe there is some hope for me. Maybe there is something more for me. And so some of those ideas are some things like self-compassionate grit, marrying self-compassion with grittiness, with having faith in yourself, some ways to trust yourself. There's a section on I matter, because agency is such an important part of bothering. And then subtle is, I really already told us subtle, right? It's allowing ourselves some quiet, whatever that looks like for you. It might look like walking or sitting in nature. It might look like the bathtub. And then desire. And desire is the real heart of the book. And it's about not getting what you want or picturing what you want or any of that. It's about developing a relationship with wanting again, because that's really what goes out the door when we are saying, why bother? We have no feeling of desire anymore. We're afraid of it. We've been too disappointed. We don't want to be vulnerable again, whatever it is. So it's all about how can we find the feeling, allow it, get curious about it, like befriend it, right? Befriend it. Become by doing is beginning to experiment, not making a plan, because any plan you make right now will be too small. But it's about saying, okay, well, if I started to experiment with desires, if I started to experiment with curiosity, what would I do? And a big part of that chapter is beginning to expand your emotional immune system, beginning to let it feel safer to take new actions. And then probably the hardest chapter for me to write, and therefore the shortest, is be seen, be seen. And that's hard for me, which might sound odd because I've been a public kind of person and out there writing books and all that for so many years. But I really discovered that being seen by friends, being seen by my now husband, Bob, being seen by my daughter, was really where I was hiding. And that if we hide our desires, if we hide who we are from the people who love us and that we love, it will often like open the valve, and why bother will just flow back in again.
Yeah. The be seen pieces, it's a really powerful, I mean, that could be a whole book, right?
It could be. So I'm not going to write it.
Right. You're like, it was my shorter chapter. I'm going to leave it at that. But yeah, what do you think it is that allows people to begin to be more comfortable, like you said, being vulnerable, with, to truly be seen? Because I think now, with social media or whatever, I mean, we're not putting out the worst part of ourselves. I mean, sometimes we share it and it's great and raw and vulnerable. But other times, it's like pretty pictures of flowers or, things like that. And so how do you think we really get to that place when, I wouldn't say it's not valued. I think it's appreciated, but it's hard.
Well, I think first we choose mindfully who we let see our full self. Mm-hmm. I would never, in that tender place, be being seen on social media. I would just feel way too exposed. Social media for me is connection, asking questions, sharing something I think is valuable, but it's not being seen. Being seen for me was really about allowing the truth that this man that I fell in love with, who I'm now married to, really did accept me for who I am. And I was the one who wasn't okay with that, not him. So I think being seen is about noticing, finding, developing the ability to show up fully in an intimate friendship. I think a therapeutic relationship is an incredible place to develop that, where we don't hide anymore. And that includes hiding our desires. And I know you've experienced this when you've led retreats yourself. That one of my favorite moments on retreats is when somebody really claims a desire and they let it be witnessed by someone on the retreat or by the whole group. I live for that moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's powerful. It's like, and the ability to give voice to something, right? It's like that's been kind of held up deep inside. The thing too that I think about, particularly with your journey to bringing this book to life, which it's so funny because to me, this happened like overnight, this book. And you're like, it did not happen overnight. Let me just tell you. But, because I think of you as still working on that memoir that you were working on, 3 years ago. So that's not fair. But, during the last retreat I was on with you. And so, this stuckness, which, happens, especially if you've been giving a lot of energy to a project, that might feel stuck, or you don't get the response from an agent or a publisher that you might be hoping for. Like, how do you begin to unstick?
Well, I think the first thing you do is realize that first step, leave behind. And I just did it with my book launch. So I can speak to that as more probably specifically than I can letting go of that memoir. That actually was really easy for me in a weird way. So I had a real picture of how this book launch would go. And it included, I'd be in New York on launch day, and it would be a major TV show. And it would be, I had so many fantasies, Kimberly. And I thought I'd earn them because I had worked so hard on this book and it had come out of so much loss. And when none of that was materializing, and then the pandemic happened and we had to cancel everything and cancel the book tour and everything else, I got really depressed. And I was holding on to what I wanted, to my picture, to my idea, to my fantasy, whatever you want to call it. And it wasn't until about, I don't know, a week or two ago. No, there's no time anymore, right? What is a day? I went, oh my God, I'm doing it. I am blocking my ability to bother about now and about what is emerging now because I'm holding on to that. And so that's really essentially the first thing we have to do when we've been disappointed. We've been disappointed. It hurts. We have to welcome that hurt. We have to feel it. We may have to get help with it. We can't run away from it or disassociate, but we are not just that hurt and disappointment. And when we know why we bother, which this is what I was then able to find with the book, I'm like, oh my God, I bother about this book. I really think it's useful. I really think it'll help people. How can I give up on that? And here's the other thing. Nobody can take the book from me. No one can take from me the fact that I wrote something I am so damn proud of. So if it ends up selling 5,000 copies and disappearing into history, I will not have a regret. And I think that's a lesson that artists and creatives in particular have to learn over and over again, right? And it's not that I wouldn't be disappointed and sad and financially stressed, because I would be, but it still wouldn't be it wouldn't be regret, right? It wouldn't be, I'm so sorry I did that.
Right.
Because I created what I wanted to create. And then my job now is to keep finding that bother, finding that desire and saying, okay, how can I be a stand for this work today and let go of what I wish was happening?
And, kind of thinking about that, can you give insight into your aha when this book kind of concept came to life? Because you mentioned at the beginning of the show, right? Like, this is the book I've been wanting to write my whole life. And so, I'm just curious if, like, okay, as you're scrapping the memoir, you're just like, why bother? And this just comes out. Like, I just like people's aha moments.
Oh, I do too. So I hired my friend, Jenny Nash. She's a wonderful book coach. And I hired her for a small flat fee to read the memoir. I had never exported it from Scrivener, which is a word processing program to write in. It's a wonderful program. And I exported it. And as I said earlier, it was 500 pages. I'm like, oh my God, I've been paid her enough money. She's not going to read 500 pages. And she didn't have to, because she quickly realized it didn't work. So she's the one that told me, this doesn't work as a memoir. Let's see what we can get out of it. And she came up with an idea to write a book called Lessons the Self-Help Guru Had to Teach Herself. And that we would make it a thematic memoir instead of a narrative memoir. So a narrative memoir is like wild or educated. You follow a narrative arc, chronological or not. And a thematic memoir would be something more like Nora Ephron's I Feel Bad About My Neck, right? There's a theme, and each of the chapters is, there might be they might relate to each other, but they're sort of standalone. So I started writing that book. It was going great. And I wrote a book proposal, gave it to my agent. My agent turned it down. Her whole agency turned it down. I'm like, I don't freaking care. I'm going to write it anyway. You won't even stop me. And I worked on it for maybe 6 or 8 more weeks. And I realized it wasn't working. I was trying to squeeze into Jenny's idea, which is not Jenny's fault at all, but it wasn't genuinely my idea. And then so we got back on the phone again, and she coached me and she said, well, what book do you want to write? And that's when it came out of my head and my mouth. Why bother? And I was thinking about a particular person that I knew who in her late 50s had decided to leave her marriage, to go on a walkabout and throw everything up in the air because she had never, ever lived her life. She had lived her life for everyone else, and now she was pissed. And I wrote her an email at some point in that juncture before I talked to Jenny, and I said, sometimes you just have to fight for your life. And I think that conversation and then Jenny coaching me, and it all just spilled out. And I was like, I swear, I wish I did. This is so bad. I don't remember the actual moment when I said, why bother? But I said it. And she was like, that's it. I'm like, that's it. That's it. And then all of these themes that have been whirling around in my head for 15, 20 years just came together, and tools that I'd been teaching, I could see where they fit, things like that. But mostly it's stories, which are chunks from the memoir. But, maybe 10% of it or something.
Yeah. Well, it's good that you were able to use that. And it does sound like your years of writing it did actually, propel you toward this project.
Oh, they did everything. I mean, that's the other thing for creatives and writers that are listening. I mean, this, but let me tell you, nothing is lost. you're always learning, you're always practicing your craft. And writing, I mean, as much as I try to teach the writers I work with to plan ahead and make a plan and not just write by the seat of their pants, so much of writing is discovery, and if we're not discovering things, the writing is usually pretty dead feeling.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that leads me to my next question, Jen. What is your kind of writing process? I know it varies for everyone, and everyone, you often hear, just get your butt in the chair, just do it, and I love that. I think it's lovely, and yet it's also incredibly hard to do. So, what does your process or practice look like?
Right. I'm not writing right now at all, except, blog posts and things like that, promotional things, which are easy to write overall. When I was writing the book, and I just want to really be honest, writing is not easy for me. I actually like rewriting a million times more than drafting. I hate to draft. I do not like uncertainty. I am really trying to teach myself to like it more, but ugh. So I'm much happier when I'm getting to move things around and smooth things and figure out the point of things, and structure makes me really happy. So, but my ritual when I'm drafting or rewriting is get up, do your morning stuff, meditate, and then I have a laptop and a desktop, and the laptop is usually downstairs, and I will let myself check email. I let myself check in with my team if anybody needs anything from me, but I don't let myself have the latte. There is no coffee. So I am chomping at the bit for that beautiful, warm, frothy latte. And so I usually only do like 5 or 10 minutes of, essential stuff. And then I make my latte, and I come soon. The signal to my little body is, as soon as the hot drink is in my hand, I'm up the stairs. And up the stairs means going to my little tiny office where I have my desktop, and I have freedom on, and I would have it programmed to block all the internet and all email, because otherwise I would come in and sit down with the hot drink and just start checking email again.
Right.
Right. And doing all those little dopamine hit things that make you feel good about yourself. So I found that was a really great process. And then the other thing that I do is the night before, I would figure out how long I could write for, because every day in my schedule is different depending on what other things I'm doing with clients or teaching or other writing. So I might know that I'm going to write for 45 minutes. I might know that I'm going to have 2 hours, and then I would, take a break in there, but not get distracted and go out into the world of email and the internet.
Yeah. I love the idea too of the next day being like, okay, I'm going to have 45 minutes. Here's my chunk. Because I read that Hemingway would always like leave his work mid-sentence so he'd know where to pick up the next day. And so I love kind of having this routine, of like, okay, here's my process, and then here's what I do kind of at the end or the night before.
Yes. And I love that. I turned Hemingway's idea into what I call breadcrumbs. And so when I teach writing, I'm like, okay, everybody, now we're stopping, when we're in a group, and leave yourself breadcrumbs. Where are you going to start next? Because we really do ourselves a disservice as creatives when we don't unmash choosing and doing. Choosing is, what am I going to write next? Or what am I going to paint next? Or, what am I going to do to build my business next? And we sit down to do it, and then we make ourselves choose. And that's often what causes fear and procrastination. So choose beforehand. So you finished your hour writing period. Choose what you're going to write next. Write yourself a little note. Get it all teed up for the next day, and you're going to have so much easier time getting into it and getting back to it instead of just sit down and start writing. I actually think that's often really bad advice.
No, that's really powerful. I think that's a good reminder because they talk about how. So I love that you use the Freedom app, but how, if every time you're pulled away, like say you work in an office or whatever, and a colleague's like, hey, blah, 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 it takes 20 minutes to get back to where you were with that task. So if you think about it, you sleep, right? And then you're starting a new day. It's like to get back to where you were when you left, it's going to take a while. So the breadcrumbs is such a great idea.
Yes. And the other thing that can be really useful is just to set aside some time that is going to come in the day. Let's say for me, since I write in the morning, because that's when my mind works best. And maybe you set aside the time that you're waiting at the pool while the kids are in swim practice, in those old days when they had swim practice, or maybe it's during your yoga practice, except you don't really want to be thinking during yoga, when you're out for a run, and you use that time intentionally to think about what you're going to write next, to dream about it, to imagine the characters, or think more about your ideas if you're writing nonfiction. And this is a wonderful way to prime the pump that also creates momentum for the next writing session.
And, you end the book, with conclusion, always begin again. And, this is one of my favorite themes from a mindfulness perspective, right? This idea of like, you're mean, you say something cruel. It's like, okay, your day's not ruined. You're not a horrible person. Let's just begin again. And what I love here is the way you have kind of pulled this together is like, when am I bothering? And this one really spoke to me. When you stop asking everybody and their life coach for advice until you first listen to yourself. Right? So, tell me what led you, because I think it's genius to end kind of with this idea of begin again.
Because this is the place that we all fall apart. We stop. We fall off the wagon of meditation. We stop writing. We eat the cake that makes us break out in hives, and then we throw up our arms. And we say, well, clearly, I cannot be a writer. I cannot be a meditator. I can't have a healthy diet because. And instead of going, oh my God, I'm so adorable. I'm so human. I'm like everybody else. And what I love about the book is the phrase always begin again, because it's built in that you're going to stop. You're going to break your promises to yourself. You're going to forget. Life's going to get crazy. Oh, yeah. And then there's going to be a pandemic. Why can't we turn it around? I used to say this to my daughter, I think maybe starting in high school. I'm like, the day that everything goes the way you want is like the day you should wait for the aliens to land.
Right.
Right. Instead of, this is our expectation. Our expectation is things that should be like lovely and perfect, and we should feel fantastic and be able to concentrate, and everybody should get along in the meeting and the family and the house. Instead of, wow, no, most of the time it's messy and I got that headache again and I forgot to drink enough water, and okay, all right, yeah, here I am being human. Here I am a human. Here I am part of humanity. It's a great way to practice sending other people meta, right? Oh, I wonder who else ate that cake they thought would be okay that made them break out in hives. I send them love. I send them forgiveness. And then it's so much easier to go back to what we desire. It's so much easier instead of either giving up entirely, or then we do the like super self-improvement thing, right? We raise the bar. We make this really complicated, strict, awful plan. And then we fail at that because of course that's not sustainable either.
And, kind of with all this, Jen, I just have to ask before my final question, is there anything that we haven't talked about? Because I feel like we've touched on so many juicy things with regard to this book, but is there anything we haven't touched on that you want our listeners to know about your new book, Why Bother?
Even more than what I want them to know about my new book, y'all, is what I want you to know is that life doesn't give up on you. It doesn't give up on Kimberly. It doesn't give up on me. It doesn't give up on any. Life is here. If you've ever had the awe of being with someone when they die or being with their body shortly after, you know the difference between life being here and life not, or a pet, an animal. And that life force is yours. It's your birthright. It is why you bother. We don't bother because it gets us something. We don't bother because things go the way we want. We bother because it means here we are becoming fully ourselves and being as alive as we can. That's our life purpose. And don't deny yourself that grace.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, that's good. That's juicy. I'm like soaking in it.
Me too. I got to hit my own words, preaching to myself.
Totally. You're like, ooh, I got this. Okay, my last question, Jen, the name of the podcast, Tranquility du Jour. So how do you find tranquility in your everyday?
I think that my big tranquility du jour most mornings is snuggling with Bob and really taking in my pleasure at our relationship and my bodily pleasure of, snuggling, putting my head on his chest, and how hard fought and won that has been. That's my tranquility du jour. That's a pretty standard thing. Don't usually skip that.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for being back on the show and putting this beautiful new piece of work out into the world.
Thank you for having me. It's a delight.
You can find Jennifer at jenniferlouden.com. Also on Twitter and Instagram at Jen Louden. On Facebook at jenlouden.writer. And also, I have a link to our earlier podcast from 2007, which is episode 74, about her book, The Life Organizer. So let's connect. If you have a moment to share a review of this podcast on iTunes or any of my books on Amazon or Goodreads, would be so grateful. And you may just hear it on the show. Details at KimberlyWilson.com/review. Also, for more episodes of Tranquility du Jour, head on over to KimberlyWilson.com/podcast. You can also subscribe in your favorite podcast app, such as Spotify, Apple Podcast, or Overcast. I've got links over in the show notes, and that way you won't miss an episode, especially since we're going to be doing weekly for a few months. Sign up for Love Notes if you have a moment. These are weekly doses of love sent straight to your inbox. And it also gives you access to multimedia resources, PDFs, videos, and more in Tranquil Treasures. There's also a link to my 6 books and social media. Thanks so much for being here. It's a treat to have you with us, and I wish you a phenomenal week ahead. Namaste.